Andrea, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today. Um, as I was telling you, we just facilitated this workshop for Catholic impact investors who are deeply concerned about embodying Catholic social teaching, which includes subsidiarity, seeking the common good, option for the poor. But before we get into all of that, I'm so excited to introduce you. We work together in a variety of different capacities. Could you just introduce yourself, your organization, and then I want to draw out a little bit of your electoral and lobbying work.
Felipe, great. Thank you so very much for having me. I'm Andrea Miller. I live in Virginia. My organization is a 501c3 and it's called Center for Common Ground. And we do a lot of electoral work. Specifically, our mission is to empower underrepresented voters to fully participate in democracy. So that means we do voter registration, we do pledge to vote, we do GeoTV, but in a way that's very different from most organizations. Number one, we never call a voter with information about voting where we don't leave a message. If you are telling people where they can vote, when it's open, you're giving the address, even if they don't pick up the phone, it's very, very important that you leave them that message. One of the things that I'm seeing in Virginia right now, we have 45 days of early voting, but I dare most people to figure out where the early voting is.
Mm.
So we look that up when
Let me
we
just pause
can't
you there because
find.
when I was making calls for the Democratic Party a few months back, they told us not to leave a message. So I totally appreciate what you're doing in your approach. Just give us a sense. We just had a little election recently, this past year. Tell us a little bit about the scope and the range of work you were involved in throughout the 9 southern states. Give us a little sense of the characterization. I remember 400,000 postcards a week at some point you were sending. Give us a sense of what some of that scale was that your operation supports.
Well, we basically worked in 9 states. We kind of worked a little bit in Virginia. We didn't do that much work because we knew Virginia was going to get her full attention in 2021. So in 2020, we sent 9.4 million postcards.
Wow.
So we postcarded every active and inactive voter in North Carolina twice. We postcarded them with a pledge to vote. And then before early voting, we gave them the phone number of their local registrar and the website where they could go. North Carolina, the state actually says, here is a list of all the early voting locations and when they're open. And we did the same thing in Georgia. So again, remember, in Georgia, we did the Georgia primary, we did the general on November 3rd, and we were back for the runoff. Now, in terms of calls, we made 1.7 million phone calls to voters. In Texas, we concentrated on voters over the age of 65, letting them know that they were eligible to vote by mail. Most of these folks had never voted by mail. So we asked them, did they want our support on vote by mail? Meaning we would walk them through getting their ballot back. And a number of voters took us up on our offer. That meant our operators gave voters their phone numbers so they could call them when they got their vote by mail ballot. And it's like, all right, now you're going to go vote for whoever you want. All right, now take your ballot and put it in the internal security sleeve. Great. Now sign the sleeve and date it. Did you sign it and date it? Great. Now put it in the mailing envelope. And then people were like, well, all right, what do I do with it now? Okay. Do you want to mail it? Do you have a stamp? I don't have a stamp. Do you have someone who can take you to a drop box? And then Texas got clever. They started allowing only one drop box per county.
Oh,
So we had to get people to put it in the mail or to get a neighbor to help them deliver the thing.
wow. No, I mean, Andrea, this is so powerful because you're helping us see how, from a Catholic perspective, just the dignity, the human indignity of our voting system, because it takes away each step. And you just perfectly narrated for us the disenfranchisement that exists at mass scale all across the South and in many parts. So help us explain what that added up to in terms of the Alabama special election a couple of years ago. What have some of your efforts added up to in North Carolina, flipping districts? Give us a sense of just what it adds up to,
Right now,
this work and this care that you
well, Well, in Alabama, we did Alabama in 2017. And I've got a number of friends in Alabama. So I called my friends in Birmingham. Are you getting calls about the special election? People aren't used to voting in December. They're like, what? Is this even an election year? Is this even a thing? People in Birmingham, if I get another phone call, I swear, had friends in Huntsville, call friends in Huntsville. And same thing, if I get another phone call, then I called my friends in Montgomery and they were like, well, haven't gotten a single phone call. They obviously don't care about us. Montgomery is the gateway to the Alabama Black Belt. And it's like, okay, I know who we're going to need to be calling. So we set up phone banks for all the counties in the Alabama Black Belt. Now, we got permission from the NAACP to contact Alabama voters 10 days before the election. So, in roughly 9 days, a day to get the phone banks up, look all the data up, where do people vote, because none of that information, it was an off election year, was published where you would really easily be able to find it. So we had to embed in each script where people voted. This is the name of your precinct. Here's the address. I mean, and it was a special election. They consolidated a bunch of precincts. So we had to walk people through. No, you're not voting there for this election. This election, you're going over here. We made 43,000 phone calls in roughly that 9-day period. And we all know how that election ended up. But again, because we are giving voters information, we are not selling them a political party or a candidate. We are making it possible for them to go and vote.
right, right. No, it's
Yeah.
it's so incredible. Just this approach, which to me is so different from, I think, a lot of how things get run. Tell us a little about your lobbying experience with the Equal Rights Amendment, just other pieces in Virginia or in Congress in Washington D.C.
Starting in 2010, I started going to DC because I'm in Virginia and it's only 4 miles away. I started going to DC to work with members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus on some very, very progressive legislation that they had. So I've done work around expanding Social Security, done work on Medicare for all, jobs for all the kind of bills and legislation that would help just regular, everyday people. Perhaps one of my most interesting lobbying adventures was the remove the ratification deadline from the Equal Rights Amendment. I worked on the Equal Rights Amendment since I was 11 years old. So that means I've got 60 no, I've got 56 years in on the Equal Rights Amendment. So I got a call from some people back in 2012, and they said, there's a whitehouse.gov petition. We need to get 30,000 signatures, and then President Obama will answer our petition on the Equal Rights Amendment. And I'd been away for a long time, got married, had kids, hadn't really thought about where it was. And I was like, is that still a thing? And they were like, yes, it's never been ratified. You know, the date ran out and we never got it done. So we're pushing to remove the deadline. And they said there are 15 unratified states. We've got 35 states. We need 3 more.
Hmm.
So it was like, okay. And I thought about it because there was another piece of competing legislation, Carolyn Maloney's bill, where we were going to start over. And I was like, well, all right, 3 is significantly less than 38. Because if you've ever done a constitutional amendment, you know, number one, has to be passed by Congress, House, Senate, signed by the president, and then it's got to go out, and 38 individual states have to ratify. Well, in 2012, the likelihood of getting Idaho, Wyoming, and Texas again was pretty darn slim. So I thought, since we do actually have active case law that says ratification is a state, once you're ratified, there's no such thing as un. So you're ratified forever. So it was like, all right, the states we have, they're stuck with the ratification. They can complain about it, but there is nothing in constitutional law that says this is how you un. So then we had to pick the states. Nevada was a state where we had a lot of really, really dedicated activists. We had a lot of dedicated activists in Arizona. I'm originally from Illinois. I'm from Chicago, which is where I originally worked on it. And Illinois always came so close. They would like miss it by 1 vote. They missed it by that much. And it was like, all right, Illinois is a possibility. We've just got to make sure activists know it's still a thing. And then Virginia. So it was like, all right, we've got a ton of really dedicated activists. I've been going down to the Virginia State House with Virginia Now since 2008. So I was like, all right, we've got activists here. And so we went to work. Now, this is 2012. And I met a young man in about 2013 in Nevada who did a lot of volunteer work on political campaigns. He was a returning citizen. He wasn't able to get a job. His wife had a really good job. He was never able to get a good job. So he volunteered campaigns. I told him about the Equal Rights Amendment, and it really resonated with him. He said, I'm the youngest of 7 children. He said, if this had been in effect when my mother was trying to raise us, it might have made all the difference.
Wow.
And this became Johnny's thing. So when he would work on these political campaigns, he was always talking about the Equal Rights Amendment. And legislators were like, that's all he talks about. Will you shut up about that? And he said, but it's really important. And Nevada is an unratified state. So when Nevada went blue in 2017, Senator Pat Spearman and a number of the other legislators called Johnny in. And they said, Johnny, we know you thought all those years when you were talking to us about the Equal Rights Amendment that we weren't listening. They said, we really were. And so we are going to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. So
Wow.
Nevada ratified in 2017, becoming the first state in the 21st century to ratify. So now we needed two more states. So Virginia, we're in there. Senator Henry Marsh was carrying the bill for us in Virginia in the Senate, and we had bipartisan support. And Senator Marsh said the Equal Rights Amendment is the last undone civil rights thing
Mm,
where we get equality for women.
mm.
And so Senator Marsh carried our bill for us. And the bill failed and failed and failed because people look at Virginia now and go, oh, Virginia is blue. Well, Virginia didn't quote go blue really until 2019. So 2013, 14, 15, 16, almost 17, we're not blue and we can't get it through the Virginia House. So, all right. Um, Illinois steps up and a Republican representative says, you know what? This was a really important thing to my mother.
Mm.
My mother really cared about this because the Equal Rights Amendment, Alice Paul was a Republican. And for years, this was very much a Republican ideal. Pat Nixon
Mm.
really supported and loved the Equal Rights Amendment. It meant women would be equal to men in the United States Constitution.
Mm.
And I used to tell people, as a Black woman, I am racially protected from discrimination. You can't discriminate or pay me less because I'm Black, but you can discriminate against me all day long because I'm a woman.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I was like, people like, what? It's like, that's true. There is no equal protection for women in the Constitution. So anyway, he was able to spearhead the Equal Rights Amendment through Illinois, and then that left one state, Virginia. We were the closest. So we went back in 2018. We thought we were going to have it in 2018. Nope. Thought we were going to get it in 2019. It sailed through the Senate. The House again wouldn't hear it. And it was like, okie dokie. That means we are going to have to totally balance of power in the Virginia State House. So that means we are going to have to replace some people in the House and the Senate. And ultimately we did. So in 2020, I got to make the closing argument on the floor of the Virginia House and the Privileges and Elections Committee. And I remember walking up to the podium and going, all right, you've been listening to me talk about this for 8 years. I know you're tired of hearing it because I'm tired of saying it. Let's get this equality thing done. And out of the corner of my eye, I see a freshman delegate by the name of Shelley Simons, who had lost her election in 2017 by one vote. It was a name drawn out of a fishbowl. And
Oh,
now here she sits, able make a historic vote on Virginia becoming the 38th state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment.
wow. Thank you so much for telling Shelley's story, Johnny's story, and your own story, a part of the Equal Rights Amendment and 38 states, and just what it takes to make a constitutional amendment that I think so many of us Americans don't appreciate what it takes and what it is. And so I'm just so impressed by your story as a citizen lobbyist, mapping the landscape. I want to conclude the political piece here just to move into the economic, because you're on the board of co-ops, you understand the cooperative economy, and I think that's such a huge part I want to move into. But before we go there, some of the relationships you've built over the years with NAACP leaders throughout the 9 states in the South here, throughout the religious community. I know there's a religious action center. I know there's a handful of other Christian denominations you collaborate with. Can you just paint up some picture of the partnerships there? And then also, I know you have some connections to tech executives that have been supportive of some of the work in the leading edge technology. Just give me 2 or 3 anecdotes in a couple minutes here about those pieces.
Well, the Religious Action Center on Reform Judaism became our partner in 2018. And so in 2020, that one entity, that one partner, they sent 400,000 postcards.
Wow.
Was just so incredibly cool. And what we are working with them now is in Texas. The landscape now is we are seeing just the biggest collection of voter suppression legislation you have ever seen. So we're working with the RAC Texas as they fight this legislation on the ground. So we built digital tools for them that they can use to make it really easy for people to email, call, or tweet their legislator and say, hey, vote no on this. We don't support this at all. So we are helping our partners on the ground in their home states fight back against these bad bills. We did the same thing with the Atlanta NAACP in Georgia. So immediately after the election was January 5th. The Georgia legislature went into session on the 13th. We started hearing about these bad bills on January 20th. And they were like, will you help us fight this? We're like, of course. So we helped them as well. So we've worked with, I spent time in California. One of my board members is a gentleman by the name of Deepak Puri. Deepak is a retired Google engineer. And one of the things that he does is whenever I'm feeling pain, meaning I need a tool to do something and it doesn't exist, he's like, oh, I can build that. So we built an election problem reporting tool called See Something, Say Something. And we just named it csay2020.com. And we had about maybe 1,100 reports of election problems. And people were able just with their phone, hey, I'm here, I'm trying to vote, and this is what I'm seeing. Or in Washington state, we don't normally think of Washington state as being a voter suppression state. Somebody took a picture of a bunch of vote by mail ballots thrown into a storm drain. So again, we've got, okay, this is what I saw. I took a photograph of it. This is what is happening here.
Wow.
When we were in the middle of doing all that early voting in North Carolina and Georgia and Texas and even Virginia, early voting locations aren't all open on the same day. They're not all open on the same times. So Deepak built a texting program for me that, based on the voter's zip code, would automatically look up their closest early voting location. So when we would text voters, what's your voting plan? Are you going to vote by mail? Are you going to early vote? Or are you going to vote on election day? Anybody that told us they were going to early vote, when we would text back, we would send them the name, the address, the date and time that their closest early voting location was open. And because they were going to vote in person, we texted them a copy of the vote writer's photo ID requirements card.
I love it. It's so cool to have a resource like Deepak, and I've loved all the stories you told me about how they've been so innovative in the way we've used technology to help access so many new things to enfranchise voters. maybe to close this segment and move to the economic segment, could you just tell me one story about, is it your dad was a poll worker in Chicago? What was it like growing up in Chicago?
Those are my
What,
uncles.
what instilled in you this incredible passion for the electoral process, for the political process, for democracy, which to me is at the heart of, you're opening all of my imagination to seeing all the injustices that exist at so many levels and how we can have agency in that. So what sparked that in you at a very young age from your uncles?
I had two uncles who were aldermen in the Daily Machine in Chicago. So I grew up in a political family. Because my father was the baby brother, every election night, he would either be with Uncle Joe or Uncle Sam. And he was, I guess we would call it in these days, he did the gopher-ing. Miss Jessie hasn't voted. I need somebody to go get Miss Jessie. Miss Jessie lives over here. So that was when I learned that when you are turning out voters, and as a matter of fact, I think it was my Uncle Sam who told me, he said elections candidate B. He said elections are about who gets their voters out. He said that's all it's about. He said none of that other stuff matters if you don't get your voters out. So, I mean, this is early 1960s Chicago, and they're getting the older voters, giving them a ride and bringing them to the polls. Why did we forget that? That a lot of the older voters were very consistent voters. They don't drive anymore. If you don't live in a big city, there's probably not public transportation. And they seem to make it a point now in many cities to locate wherever the polling location is, not on a public transportation line. So, how are voters supposed to get there?
Well, thank you so much just for this segment. And I want to wrap it up. You helped me see, and I think I've come to realize how political agency, political power are so intertwined with economic agency and some sense of economic agency. So I want to turn to that in the next segment of our conversation here. But just to round this out, you've helped me feel like I can play a part in the democratic system in a way that I've never felt that agency just through our relationship. And I think so much of democracy is about governance. And I think so much of governance is appreciating that we all have a stake in running the state, this country. And I think we were just at this Virginia Green New Deal, summit over the weekend, and you run the democracy and governance committee there. And I think to me, that's part of where economic power and political power see. We need more. We have democracy here. And we know as imperfect and as awful and as unjust and as oppressive it is for so many populations. And in our economic institutions, it's even worse. There isn't so much less democracy there. So I want to move to that piece of the things in a second, but thank you so much, Andrea, for this segment. I'm going to pause here.